Will you be here when I start?
Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. On behalf of Dana Patchett and myself, I welcome you to this piece of parent education in what at our school is the beginning of Wellbeing Week. So it seems so appropriate that we begin that focus tonight, that we're here and gathered and focusing on the well-being of young people as it relates to something that is an issue for all of us, has been for many years. Paul and I started working together in 2001 at Christchurch Grammar School in Perth. Paul is the premier alcohol and drug educator for Australasia and has for many years informed thousands and thousands of young people how to remain safe and well given the reality of being a young person and all the challenges that has around the issues that he'll talk about tonight. And he's also spoken to thousands and thousands of parents and tried to help them deal with growing up. And I think the one thing about I always sort of think about when I introduce these things is, as much as we think about our own children, just reflect on our own behaviour between the ages of 14 and 19, and then ask yourselves whether your children would be any different, and whether or not their access to different things in different ways at different times should be somehow differently managed by you than it was by your parents. So it's quite an interesting issue around state of mind, behaviour, attitudes and circumstances like that. But I'm not the expert, Paul is. Could you please welcome Paul Dillon?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Garth. And thank you to parents for being here. We might turn that down just a tad. It's all right hearing my own voice a little bit, but not that much. Maybe down just a bit. Yeah, that sounds a bit better, I think. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much to Garth. We've known each other for a very long time. He first brought me to Christ College a number of years ago. I've been here a number of times. Unfortunately, COVID got in the way for a while and a couple of other things, but I've been here a number of times. The talks always go down extremely well with that I give to students, and I'll be doing that tomorrow, speaking to the 11s, 12s and 13s, as I've done a number of times before. This talk is quite a different talk for me in many ways. Every time I come to New Zealand, I have to kind of do my homework on all the differences between Australia and New Zealand, and there are quite a few in this area. But this time, well, one of the problems in the past has always been that when you kind of look at data to see what is currently happening in this country, the data isn't collected as regularly as it is in Australia. And what that means is that quite often I'm delivering data that's a number of years old. That is not the case tonight because a whole pile of new data turned up earlier this year. So there's quite a lot of new stuff here. And that's what I'm going to kind of deliver early in the piece. So there's a few stats at the beginning, but I think it's really good to kind of have a look at what the general picture is. Now, one of the things we hate in Australia, I'm sure you hate it as well, is when people from overseas come and tell us what to do. So I'm certainly not going to do that. But I think it's really, really important to kind of give you a kind of an overview of what the situation is in this country currently around drugs. How does that compare to Australia? And then it'll be very much looking at a range of other things and what parents can do in this very complex and difficult area. As you can see, the title is Teen Parties, Alcohol and Vapes. What do parents need to know? And I'm going to cover a whole range of different things. As I said, a few statistics at the beginning and then look at some other, and particularly illicit drugs right at the very beginning. So if we can follow the following format, and that is that I present and then at the very end, if anyone has a question, we ask at the end. Is that all right with people? And that way, if you need to get off, you can. You don't have to sit and listen to questions that other people you might not have might not be relevant to your situation. Can I have a look at how old your children are? So anyone with a year 9 or below? Year 9 or below? Great. Year 10? Anyone year 10? Year 11? Year 12? And year 13? If you're still coming at 13, you're doing really, really well. Because I think you deserve a medal, to be quite honest. Now, I did see there were quite a lot of parents with year 10s. That's around the 14 age group, as I understand. Yes, year 10s are typically horrible. So that's kind of why you're here. In Australia, it's year 9, because of course we have year below. And so what tends to happen in my talks is you get a whole pile of parents of year 9s, and here it would be year 10s for obvious reasons, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about a little bit later. So, if anyone's ever been to one of my presentations before, you know that I usually start on a very, very positive note, because I think it's really important to do that. This evening I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start with something incredibly negative and then hopefully work positively towards the end of the talk, and that's this. It doesn't matter where you go across the world, and there's one study done specifically in New Zealand looking at this, but the access to anything, not just illicit drugs, but pretty well anything now is incredibly easy. When it comes to illicit drugs and the link with social media, it is it's really, really, there's a very strong link. This link is called the Uberization of the drug market. Basically, buying and selling drugs via social media is incredibly easy. It's certainly the same here as it is in Australia, but if you go on to Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and you type into, and particularly, I only do Instagram, so that's the only one I know about, and I've only done this once because I'm frightened the police will get me, but you can go into the search, you type hashtag, you write whatever drug you want, so say you say MDMA, then you write your suburb or your place of where you live, and literally within minutes you will get a whole pile of people who will contact you, who will be able to provide whatever you want. And in many cases, this is done, no cash changes hands in terms of physical. It's all done online. It's incredibly easy to access anything if you want it. The good news is, and I think that to start with this really kind of scary kind of story is important, because if you actually look at how many young people are actually accessing drugs, using them, particularly school-based young people, there's no evidence to suggest that it's dramatically changing. We're not seeing drug use spiraling out of control, which unfortunately is sometimes what the media kind of leads you to believe. And let's have a look exactly at what is currently happening in New Zealand. Zealand. Now, as I said, New Zealand is not as regular in their collection of data in this area. In Australia, we have data collection that happens every couple of years, so we keep up with trends. It's not exactly the same here. Certainly, there are some very good studies that are done here, but they're not done that regularly and certainly not released regularly. So let's have a look at brand new stuff that literally just came out earlier this year. This shows you recent illicit drug use, New Zealand adults aged 15 and over. It comes from a survey called the New Zealand Health Survey. It's done through the Ministry of Health here. And what you can see is the most popular, recent is in the last 12 months. You can see the most popular illicit drug, not only in New Zealand, but around the world, is cannabis. Marijuana, grass, weed, pot, ganja, mull, hedge, yarny, brew, spin, buds, whatever you want to call it. Second most popular drug is ecstasy. MDMA, caps, pills, pingers, molly. It's got lots of different names. You can see it's there in pill form, but now much more like to see it in caps and powder. In fact, which I found fascinating, as I understand it, we're in the Canterbury region of New Zealand, and you have the cheapest MDMA in the country, which I think is quite bizarre. This study actually looked at a whole range of different things about price, purity, availability, and MDMA was the one that appears to be the most favoured in Canterbury. And then we have hallucinogens, which are the next ones. There are a range of drugs, LSD, which is the most popular synthetic, man-made hallucinogen, but of course there's a whole pile of naturally occurring ones as well. Magic mushrooms way up there, but a range of other ones, DMT, peyote, etc. We then have cocaine right at the bottom. Now, it's really interesting if you look at Australia here. What's happening in our country is cocaine is just about to surpass ecstasy as the second most popular illicit drug. And from everything you can see that's happening in New Zealand, I think you're on the same path as well here. So the way I will present these to your kids tomorrow is like this. I don't show them how many people use drugs, I show them how many people don't. Because the reality is, if you look at every bit of drug data that we have, the vast majority of New Zealanders, just like Australians, do not use illicit drugs. They haven't used illicit drugs and they won't. If you look at this, which shows you the blue, which is 15 years and above, so this is adults, and then I'm looking at the age group that they're broken down into, and they're broken down into a few, but this is the 15-24. You can see that that is the age group where you're more likely to see some of this drug use. So you can see cannabis use certainly more likely in the 15 to 24s. Ecstasy, almost double the rate of the general population. Hallucinogens a little bit higher. And I'll show you a little bit more of that stuff in a minute. So as you can see the cannabis there, the ecstasy, and the hallucinogens and cocaine. I think this one is a very important one. Certainly, you're going to see younger people using those. Now, how have things changed over time? Are we seeing anything dramatic? Now, this shows you the past use across time. What you can hopefully see is that cannabis use has quite dramatically risen over time. Very interesting with when the government put forward the legalisation of cannabis, how that was rejected. I think that was one of the biggest surprises that I've ever. That was just mind-boggling how fast that changed, because that certainly looked like it was going to go through, and then all of a sudden it just shifted. And interestingly, since that, it's actually cannabis use has kind of dipped a little bit compared to where it was. As you can see, hallucinogens have just continued to go up. Amphetamine, or pure as you call it, relatively steady. Always that has been a drug exactly the same as in Australia, where if it's used by particular groups that have a lot of social issues as well. So you don't tend to see it used by more of the general population. You see cocaine has steadily risen, and wow, ecstasy just jumped quite dramatically over time. Now, what you've got to keep in mind of, we're talking about pretty small numbers here. We're not talking about massive numbers of people who are doing it. Now, if you look at going across time, this is past year cannabis use for 15 years and over. There's not been a dramatic jump here over time, but it's certainly there. But what age group is most likely to have used cannabis? Well, as you can see here, this is across the different age groups. You can see cannabis is more likely to be younger people, although this is a drug that continues to be used by some groups. So you can see way up 65 to 74, there most probably some hippies there, and some very, very old hippies down at the 75 plus. But that's what you'd hope. Now, if you look at the 15 to 24-year-old age group, what you can see here is that dramatically higher than the general population, which is, I don't think, any surprise. Then you can look at ecstasy, how it's gone up over time, and it has gone up. And pretty well, that's very similar kind of figures to Australia. Interestingly, exactly the same as Australia, where it's been a dip recently. Why has this occurred? Well, we think it's mainly got to do with the fact of COVID, that COVID shut down nightlife for a period of time. So, of course, this is a drug that tends to be very much linked to nightlife. If you look at which age group, well, of course, it's the two younger age groups once again. We don't go, very, very few older people do it. And if you look at, once again, that dip occurred after COVID, which I don't think is a surprise. If you look at hallucinogens, this is an interesting one where it has just continued to go up and up and up. And one of the main reasons we think this is the case in New Zealand is because, realistically, number one, some of these hallucinogens are actually homegrown, so you can actually access these here. Magic mushrooms, particularly, of course, and LSD is very easy to kind of move across the world. A lot of you're at the, as I always say to young people, New Zealand basically has the dregs of drugs because essentially you're the end of the food chain. Most of the stuff comes to Australia, we snort it all, and then we give it to you, and you don't get good stuff. And so this stuff, of course, LSD, is incredibly easy to transport. It comes on strips of paper, can't be detected by drug detection dogs or any of those kind of things. So this is a drug that very easily can come into the country if you're going to buy LSD, but of course many of these are manufactured. Grown here. So as you can see here, this is a slightly older group who's more likely to use this, and that once again suggests those people who I suppose may be a bit alternative, who are going for those kind of psychedelic experiences in their late 20s, early 30s. Now, cocaine, as you can see, gone up. Nothing like ours in Australia, where it's just skyrocketed in recent years. But which age group? And this is interesting because this is exactly what we're seeing in Australia, that it's the older age groups. If you look here, 25, 34, 45, 54, it's almost exactly the same as 15 to 24-year-olds. And that's the groups that we're seeing cocaine use just spiralling now, the older group. And who are those older group? Well, they're the parents of teenagers. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. Cocaine is really being kind of fueled by the older age groups. It's actually seen, certainly what we're seeing in Australia now, are people who just don't even see cocaine as a drug. It's just a part of, it's just like having a drink. And I think that's what we're going to start seeing in this country too. Everything in the report says cocaine is a drug that's starting to build up kind of a more positive kind of reputation in New Zealand, just like it is in Australia. So that's the latest data. Just wanted to show you all of that. And I hope that gives you kind of a better idea of what's going on and what's around. So let's actually look at a couple of the big issues. And the big issue right across the world when it comes to young people particularly is vapes. Electronic cigarettes, e-cigarettes or vapes. As I'm sure you're aware, New Zealand has a very, very different approach to vaping of almost any country in the world. Nowhere has really gone in the direction of vaping that New Zealand has. There's lots of debate about how successful that has been. And of course, the new government came in and kind of adjusted some things. I'm just going to give you some of the information I'll give to young people tomorrow, and also some additional information for parents. So, I have to say this is most probably the bane of my life. For the last 4.5 years, I have done nothing but talk about vaping with school-based young people and their parents. It's an incredibly difficult area to talk about and to educate because we know very little. We're learning more all the time, but this is a very, very new phenomenon. With what I do when I'm working with young people, I like to have messages that are accurate, credible, and make sense to young people. And when it comes to vaping, there aren't very many of those. I wish there were. I wish it was easier, but it's not. So what do I say to young people, and what do we know about vaping? Well, as I said, one of the problems is it's a very new phenomenon. And it's a new phenomenon because it was first invented by this guy here, Hon Lek. Hon Lek was a Chinese pharmacist. He was a 3-pack-a-day smoker, and his father had recently died from lung cancer. Now, when Honlick's father died, he decided he was going to quit smoking himself. Now, to quit smoking a 3-pack-a-day habit is really hard. So he needed help. So he decided to invent a cigarette that would help him quit smoking. And to do that, he invented a cigarette that had the most dangerous thing taken out of it. The most dangerous thing about a cigarette is you smoke it. You burn it. You create burnt matter. That burnt matter contains tar and a whole pile of toxic chemicals. You inhale those, they sit in your lungs, they cause cancer. Smoking causes cancer, smoking kills. What Honlick did, and it was very clever, he took the smoke out of a cigarette. What is really interesting about Honlick today is that he is now a dual user. He vapes, but he also continues to smoke. And that's certainly what you see with a lot of people who try to quit smoking with vaping. They reduce their cigarette, they reduce the number of cigarettes they smoke, but they kind of continue to smoke. Many people just like smoking, and to actually quit altogether is not an option for everyone. So that's one of the arguments that people have against vaping. Now, vapes basically come in 2 forms. The first kind is a disposable vape, brightly coloured, highly flavoured, typically fairly small, and governments, including New Zealand government, refer to these often as single-use devices. The second kind of vape is a refillable vape. These come in all shapes and sizes, and they have a tank or pod in them. In the tank or pod contains e-liquid. That e-liquid, you fill it up, and once it's gone, you then refill them. Now, how does a vape work? Well, basically, it doesn't matter what you have, a disposable or a refillable. They basically have 3 parts. Those 3 parts are a battery, a heat, and this battery is typically a lithium-ion battery. That's one of the great problems that we're seeing around the world with these now, with lithium-ion batteries. We have an atomizer or a heating element and a tank or pod. In that tank or pod contains e-liquid, and that e-liquid could just be a flavour. But in most cases, these contain liquid nicotine. Now, what happens is how they work, and when you see how this works, it really is quite incredible. Honlick was quite amazing. Essentially, you inhale, and when you inhale, that battery charges up. It then activates that little atomizer. And what it does next is quite remarkable. It has to heat up to a very, very hot temperature very fast. It has to hit a temperature of about 350 degrees Celsius. Gets very hot very fast, vaporizing the liquid, creating an aerosol. And that is most probably the most significant difference in my talks that I was delivering to young people 3 years ago to today. Because I used to say that that was a vapour. We now know categorically that these do not produce vapour. Vapour is a liquid or a solid turned into a gaseous state. So the best example of that is steam. Water turned to steam. Now the whole thing about a vapour, which makes it very unique, is that when it is released into the air, it mixes with the air and disappears. That's the important part about a vapour. An aerosol does not. An aerosol, a chemistry teacher gave me a definition of an aerosol. An aerosol is a liquid shattered into millions of liquid droplets. And those liquid droplets contain nicotine and other chemicals. And what the difference is between an aerosol and a vapour is a vapour mixes with the air and disappears. This doesn't. It stays there. And that's the big difference. Now, this is where it gets incredibly difficult. There are people in Australia, I don't know if it happens here, but certainly in Australia there are people who go around schools, stand in front of young people and say, if you vape, you will get lung cancer, you will get lung damage, you'll have this, you'll have that. I refuse to do that because we really don't know. There are certainly pieces of research that say vaping causes cancer, but there are also pieces of research that say vaping does not cause cancer. There's research that says it causes lung damage. There's other research that says it doesn't. So my message to young people is really simple, and it really is a simple message. We really have no idea what this will do to you. There's no definites here. There's probables, possibles, but the reality is, I think one of the key messages we can give to young people is we are going to be watching you very carefully if you're vaping when you are 14, 15 years old. And we're most probably going to see what kind of health impacts it has on you when you're around 23, 24 years old. We're not really going to know for some time. And as I say to young people all the time, go home, say to your parents, did you ever see a vape when you were 14? Because the reality is no one in this room ever did, because they simply weren't around. This is a completely new phenomenon. We're learning more all the time. Is it as dangerous as smoking? Most probably not. I think that we can pretty well say that, and certainly New Zealand government made some very big statements about that when they introduced the kind of moving people from smoking to vaping. But is it safe? Most probably not. I don't think anyone ever vapes and goes, this is really good for me. Most people acknowledge that there is some degree of harm. We just don't know what that degree of harm is. Now, as I said, New Zealand's vaping policy is unique around the world. There are many, many countries across the world who are watching New Zealand in this space. Of course, everything shifted a little bit when the new government came in, when they changed the moving smoking to becoming the first country in the world that will become smoke-free as such. But still, this policy does exist, that the whole idea was they wanted to actually take you had one of the highest rates of daily smoking in the world, which I think is quite phenomenal, but yet you had that, and they wanted to reduce it. And this policy has certainly done that. It's shifted from about, I think, 10% of the population who were daily smokers down to about 5%. So it certainly has been effective in that way. I think that what people get very, very confused about, though, is that it's kind of like saying it's promoting vaping. You know, basically this is still trying to get across to people that vaping is not for young people. And of course, if you've been watching the media, any kind of studies looking at vaping here, we are seeing very, very young people here vaping. More suspensions were conducted in primary schools last year in New Zealand than there were in high schools for vaping. So those kind of things are just kind of a bit scary. Certainly, what New Zealand is trying to do is promote vape-free schools, trying to push that message of, you know, vaping is not something. If you've never smoked, don't vape. That's really the message. Unfortunately, that message doesn't seem to be getting through, particularly when the market is being flooded by cheap, very poorly made disposable vapes that come primarily from some Asian countries, which I'll look at in 1 second. So what does it look like around vaping currently in New Zealand? And is it getting worse and worse? Well, as you can see, it looks like you reached your peak in 2021. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Australia as well. It does look very, very similar. You can see that from 2015 up to 2022, it's just rising steadily, the people who had ever vaped. It has dropped back. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Australia. We hit our peak, particularly in schools. It certainly appears in schools a couple of years ago, and now it's starting to settle a bit. It's certainly still there, certainly hasn't gone away, but what we're seeing is vaping has started to go down. It'll be very interesting to see if that trend continues. My gut feeling is it most probably will. If you look at daily vaping, however, that continues to rise. And there's one simple reason for that, realistically, if you think about it, because those who are vaping are becoming nicotine dependent. And so what you're seeing is those people who are vaping and getting caught on it are doing it more and more regularly. That nicotine addiction, I think, is really, really important. I don't know if you've had the same problem as we have in Australia, but in schools, for example, when they were catching people, young people vape, and the school would ring up the parents and say, we're going to suspend your child or whatever we're going to do to your child for this. Parents would often say, but they're vaping, they're not smoking. And they would see it kind of as a separate kind of thing. I think one of our great problems with the whole issue of vaping is that we have a generation of parents, and I'm looking at you people in front of me. Many of you are far younger than I am. I'm in my mid-60s, and I have a very good memory of living in a smoking world. I can remember when I was in my 20s, when I was going to nightclubs and all that kind of stuff, everyone smoked everywhere I went. When I left school, I went to a school in Australia where we had a vaping room in year 11 and year 12, and a smoking room in our final 2 years of high school. We were actually able to smoke at school. We had a common room where we could smoke. Going to nightclubs, you come home and your hair would just stink of smoke. Now, there are parents in this room who are not old enough to remember that. They don't remember a very high chunk, a big chunk of their year group when they were going to school actually smoked and were nicotine dependent. And I think that's one of our great problems with this area, is that parents don't have a memory of what it's like living in a nicotine addicted world. And certainly we're moving towards that again, and that's incredibly sad, particularly for someone like me who's been doing this for at least almost 30 years now. I never had to talk about nicotine. I have not talked about nicotine in schools for 25 years, and now I am again. And that's kind of sad that we've moved back to that. So as I said, Australia has a very, very different approach to vaping compared to New Zealand. And I'm pretty sure if any of you have been to Australia recently, you would have seen the difference. Basically, this is the situation. In Australia, vaping is legal. What I mean by that is, if I went into a school and I wanted to show a group of Australian kids some cocaine, I went in and I said, here's cocaine, I'd be arrested. Cocaine is illegal. I couldn't do that. But I could go into a school and I could actually show them, hold a device, and that's totally legal. The possession of a device in Australia is legal. What is illegal is the product inside, the liquid nicotine. Liquid nicotine has been illegal in Australia for almost 30 years. And the only way you can buy or possess liquid nicotine in Australia is if you have a prescription from a GP. You've got to go to a doctor, say to a doctor, I don't want to smoke anymore, I want to vape. And the doctor can give you a prescription which allows you to purchase liquid nicotine or a liquid nicotine device, and it's been approved by the government. So what happens if you don't have the... Now, can I say, when I showed this to your kids tomorrow, I was at King's College earlier this year in Auckland, and when I showed this to the New Zealand kids, they almost had a nervous breakdown. Yeah. Because when you see what will happen if you do... so, for example, I live in Sydney. If I got busted having a device with liquid nicotine in it, I would get an on-the-spot fine of $1,100. If I got caught in Tasmania, it's $7,850 or 2 years in prison. If I got caught in Queensland, $9,752. In South Australia, a maximum of $10,000. In the Northern Territory, $15,400 or 12 months in prison. If you got caught in Victoria, $15,546, but don't go to Canberra. You get caught there, and you'll get caught there, $30,000 or 2 years in prison, or both. And then the whopper of all of them is good old WA, because there, I can't find anywhere in the world that has a harsher penalty from WA, and that is $45,000. Now, when I say this across Australia, young people look at me and they go, you gotta be kidding. Because does anyone ever get busted for this? No. Because the reality is it's such a difficult law to police. Because what happens is, if the police catch you and they believe they've got to prove it's liquid nicotine in that device, that costs a lot of money to do, and it takes about 30 days to get the result. So as a result, it just doesn't happen very often. So as a result of that, the Australian government introduced a brand new law, and that came into effect today, actually, one of the laws. This is the first part of the law, and that was that on the 1st of January 2024, the Australian government banned disposable devices. Basically what that means is that the government now, the Border Force, if any of these devices cross the border, because none are made in Australia, unlike New Zealand where you manufacture, you've got a very big vaping manufacture industry now in New Zealand. If any vape crosses the border, they could hold them and destroy them. That was the first stage of the new section of laws. The second one came in today, which is that the only place you're allowed to purchase these now are in pharmacies, and that's the second part of the law. Now, how about New Zealand? Well, New Zealand introduced a new law earlier this year, and that is this, that you have now got exactly the same ban, the disposable vape ban, which is once again incredibly difficult to police, but it's certainly, that's the next stage, where they've tried to remove these single-use devices that tend to be more appeal to young people, and that's what they've tried to change. Certainly now, as the law is in place here, that retailers now caught selling vapes to under 18 will be fined $100,000. And interestingly, they introduced this one, which is a really, really good idea, and making it very kind of loud individuals. So say, for example, there was a young man at the school who got caught selling vapes to somebody else, then they could be charged under this law. It's really trying to kind of not just make it about, because most young people do not buy these from retailers. They get it through social media, through friends. And if there is someone who is on selling them to someone else, they get caught under this law as well, which is, I think, a very, very positive thing in some ways, to try to remove that kind of, I don't know if you call it a criminal element, but certainly a problem there. So what about young people? What about New Zealand students in vaping? What's happening there? Well, I was hoping there was going to be brand new data on this, but this is from 2021. I think the new stuff is coming out any day now. And this is once again showing you this issue with nicotine addiction. So this is New Zealand students who reported vaping within the last 7 days across the 5-year groups. And typically, not a surprise, as I said, it's that year 10 group that is typically the most problematic group. They're the group who most probably are just being able to get access to, whether it's vapes, alcohol or cannabis, whatever, that tends to be the age group that you tend to see these problems with. And they don't kind of necessarily have the life experience or the nous to go, that ain't a good idea, I could get into trouble. And so you tend to find this is the age group where you see a little bit of more experimentation or kind of silly behaviour. This shows you and this is what I will show young people tomorrow, that the vast majority of all year groups don't vape. But then you look about the frequency of vaping among those who reported vaping in the past week. And, the people who were doing it in the past week weren't necessarily doing it, not particularly regularly. They were smoking several times a day. So that's where you got that nicotine-dependent people, those nicotine-dependent young people. And if you're nicotine-dependent at 15, 16, you've got a battle ahead of you for a while. And I don't know what's happening here. I tried to find out. I contacted a few people to ask what the kind of rules around nicotine replacement therapies are here. But in Australia, we are seeing more and more schools who are now kind of being the bridge between a young person, his family, and a doctor who's prescribing nicotine replacement therapies. I'm going to so many schools now where young people, the most classic was I was at a Melbourne school at the end of last year, and these two girls, aged 15, ran up to me and they said, oh, Paul, I'm so proud of themselves. They lifted up their sleeves and both of them were wearing a patch, nicotine patch. They started vaping during the second Melbourne lockdown. So that was, goodness me, 2-3 years ago now. They're now very, totally nicotine dependent. They were going to be, the school was about, they'd been busted many times vaping. They'd been told that if they didn't stop, they would be asked to leave. They begged and they pleaded, and the agreement that was made was they would wear a patch to school all the way, so they didn't have to vape. The really sad part with those girls were on a Friday afternoon, they took the patch off so they could vape all weekend. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of young people who are in this kind of situation. So I think one of the great problems is that this is a very difficult thing to challenge because of this, the promotion and normalisation of vaping. Now, I just look at this first off, and I just think, that's incredible. Look, I'm 65 next birthday, and if I could do that, I'd be walking around the street doing it all over the place. I mean, look, it's coming out of every orifice. It's quite remarkable. And now I only follow 60 people on Instagram, and one of them is this guy here. And have a look what he can do. As I said, if I could do that, I'd be doing it everywhere. And you've got to remember, I come from an era where we got excited by a smoke ring. Look what he can do. I mean, God, look at that. I mean, it's incredible. Can you imagine if you were a 15-year-old and you went to a party and you could do that in front of your mates? You're going to be glorified. I mean, you really will be. So you could see how this is really, really attractive to young people. And I think it's really important for parents to look at it and go, that's why they're doing it. Because they are seeing young people who can do quite these amazing things with them. And that's incredibly hard to challenge. How do you actually beat that with young people? Very, very hard. You can talk about all the risks and everything else, but the fact of the matter is, socially, it's very, very attractive. But if you look at all of that, and this has just started in New Zealand because there was a very, very big article on this in New Zealand Herald a couple of weeks ago, there's more. And more are these oral nicotine pouches, which have recently been banned in this country. The originals were banned many, many years ago, but the new type have recently been banned. But these I predict in the next 12 months, you're going to see this become such an issue right across the country, and particularly in schools. Snus or Zin. Now, that is snus, by the way. Always remember it rhymes with moose. And Zim. Now, for those of you who don't know what they are all oral nicotine pouches. This here, I think, most probably it looks a bit more like Zin than snus, and I'll show you the very big difference, because there is quite a big difference. This is true snus. Snus looks like literally tea bags. These have been around for a very long time. They're kind of the next stage on from snuff. So if you've seen, movies set in the French Revolution, you've got all those people and they've got the big white hair and they sniff it. I always used to think that was cocaine. It wasn't. It's actually nicotine. And so it's a move on from that. And these are, if you've travelled and you've been to Scandinavian countries, you would have seen these. Snus is huge in particularly Sweden and Norway. It's banned across all other European Union countries and certainly was banned in New Zealand and Australia back in 1991. They were banned a very long time ago. And the reason they're banned is because they are a tobacco product. What's contained inside there is minced up, moist tobacco. What you do is you put it between your gum and your lip, and what you'll get is very, very fast nicotine hit, quite intense nicotine hit. And they were banned because they are a tobacco product. There's something about tobacco that people might not know, but if you put tobacco in your mouth and it touches any mucous membrane, it's linked to oral cancers. So you get cancer of the mouth, lip, tongue, a range of different ones. And that's why chewing tobacco was banned in many parts of the world. This, in Scandinavian countries, they say that true snus should not cause a problem like that, and they don't have high rates of oral cancer in those countries, but that because it's actually in this kind of little pouch, so the tobacco should not touch your mucous membrane. You get a lot of nicotine here, a lot, so you're going to get that very, very intense hit. The harms, basically all around, bad breath, tooth wear, whatever. This is most probably the most pleasant photo that you could find of what it does to your gums. There are some horrific photos that you can find, but it can cause permanent gum recession. But the biggest problem with these, of course, is they're nicotine. So you're going to see nicotine dependence. I think Sweden has one of the highest rates in Europe of nicotine dependence because of snus, simply because it's got so much nicotine in it. Now, as I said, these have been banned, and we really, since the early 90s, if I went around this room and I said, have you seen these in New Zealand? If I asked any Australian, have you seen these in Australia? People would go, no, you just don't see them. They've been around, but not really present. Then Zyn hit. Now, Zyn is a completely different story. I went into a couple of, I think they were tobacconists, I'm not quite sure what they were, when I went into them in Christchurch this afternoon to see if they had them, and they were very, very cold on what I was saying. I think they thought I was a police officer, I'm not quite sure. But you can see they look quite different. They almost look like a bit of chewing gum. They're very flat, so it's not much more like a tea bag. And what these are is, to avoid the law around being a tobacco product, these are synthetic nicotine. Essentially, some Swedish and American kind of company put these together to bypass the tobacco laws. And what they also added on top was a flavour. So what you can do is you can buy them in mint, there's so many, blackcurrant, apple, all of those. Very similar to what we saw with vaping, very similar. Now, this was originally produced in 2014, but they didn't really hit the market till 2020, and in the last 4 years they have just exploded. Right across America, they're huge, certainly in many parts of Europe, and now in Australia and in New Zealand. They are starting to kind of become a very big thing. Basically because a lot of young people who are vaping can go to nightclubs, bars, etc. You can't vape inside. So what they do is they put some of these in their pockets, just put that in, and bang, they can sit in a space and go undetected. Certainly exactly the same thing can happen with kids. The issue with these are they come in different strengths. So Zyn come in 2, 6 and 9 milligrams of nicotine. Now, a cigarette, for those of you who might not know, when you smoke it, most probably about 10 milligrams of nicotine. You don't ever get 10 milligrams in because, of course, you lose a lot in smoke. So if you're going to use a 9 milligram thing, which you'll get the whole feeling of a cigarette straight away, that's a pretty intense effect. And if you go onto TikTok, and if you want to see the world's stupidest people, go onto TikTok and just type in Zyn. There's one, I hope this young woman is not at a school I go to in Australia, because if she is, she'll sue me. But literally, she's the stupidest person I've ever seen on the planet. She goes, I've never used a Zyn, but I'm going to put 5 in my mouth. and she puts 5 9-milligram Zins in her mouth, and within about 6 seconds she's vomited all over the camera. And yeah, there are now Zin challenges about how many you can put in your mouth without throwing up, all that kind of stuff, which is really silly. We don't know very much about the harms, but these are chemicals that we've never seen used before, so we don't know much about them. But the big issue is, once again, it comes down to that whole nicotine thing. We're talking about getting young people messing around with a substance that is not a great idea. I will also say that if you go online, just type in Zin and type in, because I did that in my hotel today to see how easy there it is into New Zealand kind of on the web. So easy to get them here, very, very simple. And when you actually buy these, what comes on the same website are caffeine pouches. And if you look at the amount of caffeine, some of the caffeine pouches have 50 milligrams of caffeine in them. You put it in your mouth, you're going to get a 50 milligram hit of caffeine. That is like having a Red Bull bang, like that. That's what it would be like. And so I think that's another thing. We're seeing kids trying to do exams and study with these, of course, because nicotine tends to help you focus a bit. And that's a bit of a worry. Just to give you an idea, this is some of the TikToks that I could find on New Zealand about how easy it was to get them, where you can buy them from, that they just literally disappear very, very quickly. That's the kind of website. But these are the kind of stories that I'm getting from young people who've written to me and saying, look, you're talking about vaping all the time, you should be talking about Zins, and this is the kind of thing they say. This is a great one. I never vaped and really didn't know what effect nicotine would have on me. When I tried Zins, I put it on my gum and almost instantly I felt really sick. It was very overpowering. I started sweating and my heart was pounding. My friend told me that it settled down, but it didn't. I threw up repeatedly and the head spins were horrible. My night was ruined. I had 2 girls who contacted me 2 weeks ago who wrote to me they were going to their final high school formal kind of thing. They knew they were going to be breathalyzed to go into the formal. They weren't allowed to drink beforehand, so what they did is they took 2 Zins with them, they put them in their mouths. Both girls were violently ill as a result, and they kind of completely missed their high school formal because of it. So I think this is certainly an issue that I just wanted to kind of let you know is around, and certainly in New Zealand. But let's go on to what the core base issue always is when we go to high schools, and that is alcohol. First off, I need to make it very clear that I don't drink. I didn't drink alcohol as a teenager. I've never really drunk alcohol since. I think that's one of the great problems I have with this, because I just don't quite get it. But I think when you don't like alcohol, I don't like the taste of it, it's always a bit of a problem. I also, very, very importantly, my sister-in-law always says, I have to say this, I don't have children. If I did have a child, they'd live in a cellar, they'd be chained to a wall, and they'd never be allowed out. And that's because, unfortunately, as Garth knows, I've been involved with many, many parents who've lost their children, and almost all of them because of alcohol. This is an area which I think parents tend to neglect for a whole range of reasons, and I get that, but it's an area where if things go wrong, they go terribly wrong. And it's really important, I suppose, to look at it as objectively as possible, and that's what hopefully I will do today. So what do we know about alcohol? Well, this is without a doubt one of our great successes, certainly not only in Australia but around the world. And I wish we had a little bit more data from New Zealand. We don't have much, but what we have is showing some really positive signs as well, just like everywhere else around the world. So I'll show you what Australia's data is, and there's only one slide, and that's this. This is the number of young people from a very big survey called the Australian Secondary School Alcohol and Drug Survey. And it shows you those students from 12 to 17, they leave the 18-year-olds off, of course, because they're legally able to drink. Those who had never consumed alcohol in their lives. So way back in the 90s, it was 1 in 3 who had never consumed, 1 in 10 who had never consumed alcohol. It's now 1 in 3. This is a trend that is replicated all across the world. Last October and November, I was in the US and the UK. In Europe, their figures have gone from 1 in 10 to 1 in 5. We have, Australia has probably the most significant change in behaviour, going up to 1 in 3. Now, unfortunately, the one thing that New Zealanders don't collect is how many had never consumed alcohol. They collect other stuff, which I'll show you in a minute. They don't show this, and that's really sad, because if we had this, I don't think it would be particularly different. I think you'd see very similar numbers. But let's have a look at past year drinkers. So this is 15 to 17-year-olds, so the young people I'll be speaking to tomorrow. And you can see here how things have changed, and they have gone down. we are seeing past year drinkers gone down. Not dramatically, but certainly it's gone down. Where we've seen it, and this is something that I think often shocks parents of daughters, is young women are far more likely to be drinkers than their male counterparts. That is a consistent theme across all of the Western world. And one of the reasons for this is that you're talking about young women. Who do young women hang out with? Older young men. And of course that kind of changes their behaviour a little bit earlier than the young men. So I think that's really important. 55% of young women were past year drinkers, 47% of young men. If you look at, what's this, this is about risky drinking. So you're drinking 6 or more drinks on one occasion, at least monthly. What you can see here is this has gone down. This is one of the things that has gone down. So that risky drinking has gone down. This shows you that's a past year drinking that I just showed you, and this is those who drank in a very risky way, and it has gone down from 1 in 5 down to almost 1 in 10. So that's a really positive thing. But once again, the young women are twice as likely to, far more likely to be the heavy drinkers, the risky drinkers. I think this is quite remarkable when you see the difference in New Zealand, and it's not something you see on the surface in this country, which I think is really, really interesting. You see it consistently in the New Zealand data that women, and it's not about being more at risk, because certainly young women cannot drink as much as men. So when you're looking at risk, that's different. Women would be up here, men would be down here, because of course you're not meant to drink as much. This is actually how many you drank, which is kind of a bit of a worry. So I think what you would see here is, when you're looking at this, is that if you had how many had never drunk, I think you're going to see similar figures. So we're seeing some positive change in New Zealand. But I suppose the big question for parents in the room here would be, okay, as a parent, when do I need to be worried about alcohol? When should I start thinking about it? Well, if you look here, I hope you can see very clearly what I said before, because we're coming down to that wonderful age group of 14. So this is a study that I did in Australia that looked at how much young people were drinking, if they drank. So we asked them, 12 up to 17 years, if they had drank, they had a few sips, less than 10 drinks, more than 10 drinks. What you can see, hopefully, and I use this one, I could use any study, but this is the one that's really simple, because visually I hope you can see where it all changes. Basically, at 12, if they did drink, they drank very little. At 13, a few sips. 14, a few sips. Ding, 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 alert, alert. The age going from 14 to 15 is where everything shifts. That by year 11, and tomorrow I will be starting my talks with year 11s, by year 11, alcohol has become a part of most year 11s' lives. And I think that's really important to remember. That is the age where it kind of shifts. It's really interesting when you actually speak to any teacher who follows a year group through, like a year coordinator who follows them all the way through from year 9 to year 10, year 11 on, and you say to them, when was the biggest change in behaviour? When did you see the biggest shift in their behaviour? I've never met a teacher who doesn't say it's when they leave school when in their 14th year, so in this country it'd be in year 10, when they leave school in year 10 and they come back to school in year 11. Behaviour has shifted. And why has behaviour shifted? Why has this change occurred? Well, it boils down to parental behaviour. What happens is your monitoring shifts. It changes. And it changes for a really simple reason, because parenting gets really hard at that age. Parenting is never simple, but certainly at that age it becomes so much more difficult, particularly around socialising and particularly around alcohol. And I'll give you an example of what I mean, because I guarantee there are some parents who are here this evening for just this reason. Your child will find a time, a perfect time, when you are distracted, usually on a Thursday night if you've got the shopping in or something like that, and they'll say to you, Mum, I want to go to Jill's house on Saturday night. You can't call Jill's house, you can't take me there, and you can't pick me up. In fact, you can't know anything about Jill. Can I go? Now, you would think any parent who has 2 neurons that occasionally bounce together would look and go, no, of course not. I need to know more about Jill, her family, and what's going on before I allow you to go somewhere on a Saturday night. You would hope. But the trouble is, your child is clever. They found a time where you are distracted, and you know what? You just want them to go away. I did a survey a couple of years ago where about 1,500 young people, it was a one-page sheet where I just got them to answer a couple of questions. One of the questions was, when's the best time to get what you want? And you know what? I've got to say, girls were particularly clever here, but pretty well it's everyone. And they all basically said, when mum is on the phone. And they could even identify who you're on the phone to. So it was typically your best friend or your sister. And that was a time when they know that they're going to get what they want, because you just have this child just kind of rambling in your ear constantly. You just tell them, yeah, you can do what you want. And so you say, that sounds like a great idea, go for it. And the trouble is, when you say that once, and you only need to say it once, you can't go back. And that's a real problem here, because your child will turn around and say, once you've let your rules lapse a bit, you've let your monitoring just lapse that little bit, the next time if you turn around and you try to change it, they'll look at you and they'll go, that's not fair. And it isn't. You can't kind of change the rules. Once you've let that go once, that's it. This is not about spoiling their fun. Let's get really serious here. And if anybody in this room drank when they were a teenager, that's most probably what happened. You had a really good time. That's the fact. I mean, I could lie and I could say, yes, all of us had terrible experiences, but the fact of the matter is, most people who drink in their teen years have a good time and they survive. In fact, they flourish, so nothing bad happens. But unfortunately, when it does go wrong, it goes terribly wrong. And this is just an example. I still can't believe it happens over here, but I've got 48,000 followers on Instagram. And the times I've come to New Zealand, I give my talks and I say, you can follow me on Instagram and all that. I never think New Zealand young people are going to do it. But they do. And I was saying to Garth today, I've got a couple of young men who followed me from Christ College from my first trip here, which would have been, how many years ago? Is he 10? Maybe about 10. It was a long time ago. And they still follow me and they're in their 20s. And I get these incredible photos on a Saturday night of young people following the tips and strategies that I suggest in my talks, which is just wonderful. But on a Sunday afternoon, I get these awful photos of young people in hospital, in the back of an ambulance, on life support sometimes, who say to me, look, I heard your talk, I liked your talk, and I just didn't think it would happen to me. And then, sadly, something does. They end up in hospital. That is a classic example of a young woman who sent me that photo. Her parents gave me permission to show it, even though I kind of did have pixelated her face. But essentially what happened to her was she went out. Luckily, her friends were with her. She drank too much. She lost consciousness. Her friends called an ambulance. She was rushed to hospital. Her parents arrived, took that photo of her. And she was in a bit of a state, but about 10 minutes after that photo was taken, she stopped breathing. She was rushed into hospital, into intensive care, where she remained for about 7 or 8 hours. Thank God she was in hospital when it happened. And those kind of things go wrong. When they go wrong, they go terribly wrong, and we lose our young people. It's a real battle for parents about, we want our kids to go and have fun, and the whole thing about it is we don't want parents to be helicopter parenting their child and hovering over them and not allowing them to take part in activities, and particularly socialising activities. It's incredibly important your kids learn how to socialise safely. But getting that balance between making sure that they are safe, but also enabling them to take risks, because of course our kids learn how to be well-rounded adults by some healthy risk-taking. Trying to get that balance can be hard. Certainly the way to do it is to access the best information possible. Make sure you connect and keep communicating with your child, which can be a real battle around that age of 14, 15, when they start to become non-verbal in their responses. And very important, allow strategies to be put into place that will reduce or minimise harm. And look, schools have been doing that. My job is to come in and value add to that. So what can parents do to keep teens as safe as possible? What do we know? Well, certainly when it comes to alcohol, you really are looking at this is an issue around at the very, very latest. You should be thinking about it at 14. But I believe when your child finishes primary school, if you have not created rules around alcohol by that age, you're waiting too late. Sometimes parents go, really? Primary school? Yeah, primary school. Why? Because the rule around for a 12 or a 13-year-old is really simple. You're not having any. And you know what? No child is ever going to argue with you're not having any at 12 or 13. They're just going to be thrilled they have a rule around alcohol. But creating those rules early and adapting them as they get older is most probably the safest way to go. Why? Because if you introduce rules around alcohol the first time they're going to go to a party where alcohol might be present, you're going to have a battle on your hands. Introduce them early, it's going to be safer. Now, I want to make this very clear at this point, because this last kind of section of my talk, this is not, there's no parental shaming here. And certainly I have no right, none, to tell you what to do with your child when it comes to alcohol. Only you can make that decision about what rules, what boundaries you're going to have in this area. But can I say, only you. And what that means is you're not influenced by your next door neighbour. You're not influenced by your son's best friend's parents or something. It's your rule. Because when you start to be influenced by others, that's when you let your guard down, you let your own values down. And can I tell you, when you have created rules and boundaries and you haven't followed, well, you're going to see what I'm saying here, but follow your heart, and then something goes wrong, you will never forgive yourself. Make sure they're your rules, your own rules for your child. Whatever decision, base it on the best information possible. I'm going to give you some information, particularly around what the evidence says around provision of alcohol, parental provision, and most importantly, follow your heart. I guarantee everyone in this room at one point or another has said to their child, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. And do you know what? As a parent, follow your own advice. A best example I can have of this is, say that you have your child wants to go to a party and it's got a whole part of 18, 19-year-olds drinking, okay? That your child's 15 and there's 18 and 19-year-olds drinking alcohol there. There's very little way that you can make that a safe event, to be quite honest. But if you believe your child needs to go because of their socialising, it's important for them to feel part of the group, whatever reason, then you know what? You make it very clear that you're not happy with the event, but you're going to say, I'll let you go. But put caveats around it, put safety nets and say, okay, well, you can go to that party, but I'm taking you, I'm picking you up, and you're going to be there for 2 hours. So you put little boundaries around it to keep them safer. And of course, those things change as they get older. So why should we worry? I guarantee there are some people in this room who think, well, I drank alcohol when I was young and there's nothing wrong with me. Now, I know you find this hard to believe, but I actually get people who come up to me and say that to me. And I look at those people and I go, there's so many things wrong with you, I can't even begin to tell you. I mean, I find it unfathomable that anyone would say that to me, but they do. The evidence is really, really clear in this area. It's not like it's kind of a little bit maybe doubtful. It's so clear. Delay your child's first drink of alcohol for as long as possible. Now that can be really challenging in a world which is particularly in a culture where alcohol is celebrated at the core of many things. But the reason we say it is because of so many different things. It's not just one or two, there are so many here. And if any of you are parents of daughters, this is a huge one that has so much evidence on. You know, if you have a history of breast cancer in your family and your daughter is drinking at 15, 16, the increased risk of her developing breast cancer is just phenomenal. It takes you 5 seconds to read a website to find out that. But most parents just choose to ignore it. Now, can you stop a 15, 16-year-old drinking alcohol if she wants to? Well, most probably not. But you can certainly kind of try to reduce it. So many things, but the biggest one by a mile is the developing brain. Certainly when I started working in this area, we used to believe the brain finished developing at 15, 16. At 15, 16, that was as good as a brain gets. That's incredibly sad if you look at year 9s. If that's as good as a brain gets, we might as well give up now. In fact, a brain gets much better than a female brain about the age of 21, 22. We used to believe a male brain was about 25, 26, but then we discovered no, it was more like 35. And then in 2019, a couple of pieces of research came out that said it could be as late as 40. Now, that's got to do, all the important parts are finished at 25, 26. The one part that isn't appears to be risk-taking. But the developing brain is really important. That part's really important. We want to keep our kids safe. So we've moved from this whole idea of a Mediterranean model to delay, delay, delay. Now, as I said, this is not about telling you what to do. If you were brought up with that Mediterranean model and you believe that in your family, giving your child a drink of alcohol with a meal surrounded by your family is the way to go, then that is your choice. And no one can knock you for doing that. But it's really important to remember what a Mediterranean model isn't. And the Mediterranean model is not giving your child 2 drinks to take to a party and let them drink them by themselves. That is not the Mediterranean model. That is just, it's too difficult for me to say no, and it's easier to send them off with 2 bottles. That really is what that is. It's certainly not the Mediterranean model. This is the part that I think is really, really hard. Alcohol sets particular challenges for parents. The evidence is very clear here. If you actually don't want your child to drink, you don't give them any alcohol, and they know that there's a consequence if you catch them drinking, then you know what? Guess what? They drink less. It's that, or they don't drink at all. The trouble is that there's this whole idea of parental provision of alcohol, that if you give them alcohol, then that is going to somehow protect them. How true is that? Well, in Australia, our data is kind of scary in this area, because what you can see is this is the most common source of last alcoholic drink. Way up the front now is parents, followed by friends. Now, if I threw it out to you and I said, how many of your parents gave you alcohol to take to a party on a Saturday night, I wouldn't imagine too many of you would say yes. For some reason, this is a completely new generational thing. And thank goodness we now have data from New Zealand, which is exactly the same. This is New Zealand data. So this is from 2022. And what you can see is this is if they bought their own alcohol or if they stole it, because I think many parents think it's stealing. You do have a higher rate of stealing than we do, which is interesting. But when it comes to given alcohol, way out the front is parents. Parents are more likely to be the provider of alcohol than anyone else. And if I went around this room, it would be dramatically different, I guess, I guarantee. If I said to you, if you were given alcohol by someone, it would have been a friend. It would have been someone older, an older person who gave it to you. And I guarantee most of you in this room, if you did drink alcohol when you were a teenager, you were drinking from a box of wine behind a bush in a park. It wouldn't have been very pleasant. And as a result, realistically, if you think about that experience, it wasn't very pleasant. You didn't drink very much because you were terrified of getting caught, and all those kind of things. Now kids are giving it on a platter, and somehow people think that's safer. Well, is it? Well, there are two studies I just want to show you very quickly. This one is the gold standard. This comes from the University of New South Wales. They got 1,900 adolescents and their parents. They picked them up at 12 and they've been tracking them ever since. They're still tracking them today. But this is when they turned 17. And they wanted to look at, was parental supply of alcohol protective? So they looked at young people given no alcohol, young people given a sip, young people given a glass, and young people given a bottle to take to a party. Was it protective? Well, they found that there was no evidence that parental supply protects from adverse drinking outcomes. In fact, when you provide alcohol to your child, it's associated with subsequent binge drinking, alcohol-related harm, and symptoms of alcohol use disorder. They're things like withdrawal. There are two very, very clear findings from here, and these were replicated in this study. We see it in so many other studies from around the world, but the two studies are, two major findings. There's no evidence of any benefit or protective effect. So if there's anyone in this room who does provide alcohol to their child, and as I said, this is not about telling you what to do, but if anyone here is doing it because you think it's protective, it isn't. There's no evidence of that. I just think I would love to hear parents be just a little bit more honest here sometimes and say why they really do it. I've never met a parent ever who feels good about giving their 15 or 16-year-old alcohol to take to a party. No one ever goes, yeah, that's a really great thing to do. I don't feel really comfortable with it. But if you say, why do you do it? Most parents go, I'm just so tired. Everyone else does. I'm the only one, and I held it for so long, and now I just can't hold it for any longer. Look, I'm the eldest of three boys. My brother, who's 57 years old, he's my baby brother, he got everything. As you can tell, I haven't got over that. I've got a chip on my shoulder. Now, my mum is 85 years old, and I sometimes still say to my mum, why does he get everything and not me? As you can see, big chip. And my mum looks at me, and I just think it's wonderful. She looks and she goes, I got tired. And I just think that's what, if parents could actually just turn around sometime and go, I do it because I'm tired. I just can't keep saying no every weekend. It's just too hard. And I think if you're honest about it, because if you believe that it's protective, it certainly isn't. Because this is the scariest one. Parental supply is associated with increased risk of other supply. Basically what that means is when you give them two, when they finish those, they go and drink two more. This is not about them being manipulative. It's not about them being deceitful. They're just young people. And truly, if any parent just thinks about it for 5 seconds, do you really believe when you give your child 2 drinks to take to a party and they drink them quickly? Do they go and drink, if they drink them quickly, do they go and sit in the corner and play Scrabble for the rest of the night? Of course they don't. they're surrounded by their peers, they're going to find two more. And so what you're doing is making them drink more. Now, what are they drinking? Now, in Australia, and I can't imagine it's any different here, I couldn't find any data on this in this country, but it would be almost exactly the same. It's pre-mixed spirits are the big one. We've gone away, which is great. We've dropped off spirits. That's kind of dropped off a little bit, which is terrific, but pre-mixed spirits is it. And interestingly, beer is just dying dramatically right across the world. So if you give them two drinks, what does that mean? Now, I don't want to be immodest here, but I think the next part of my talk is brilliant. So I'm just going to let you know that at the beginning because I just think this is so clever. So what does it mean when you say to your child, when you say to someone, I just give my child two drinks to take to a party? What does that really mean? So how much is that? And particularly if they're drinking pre-mixed spirits, what does it mean? Now, if you go onto the Australian Government Department of Health and Ageing and you have a look at how many standard drinks are in drinks, I just think that is useless because really it's not very practical. It's all just a pretty coloured tins and bottles. So I went into a bottle shop in Australia and I went and had a look exactly how much was in a can. Now, I only went into one little I think it was a bottle shop today, and had a look at a couple, and it's very similar. So there's nothing dramatically different here. But let's have a look at how much you would be if you're sending your child with a couple of drinks, how much they're really drinking. So this is a drink that I can't believe even still exists, but in Australia it does. It's West Coast Coolers. These are so tragic, it's unbelievable. But they're about a 0.7 of a standard drink. Okay, they've been around for a long time. What is big here, certainly very big in Australia, are ciders. Ciders have just taken off. Now, this is a particularly evil group of drinks because they came in and they were one standard drink, every single one of them. The companies have all caused them to rise, and they're up to sometimes 2.4 standard drinks, particularly the hard ciders. These kind of drinks, which are 0.8 of a standard drink, but these are the same size as a Red Bull. So they're quite small and quite lethal, and they certainly just taste like lolly water, but they're quite high. But which ones are the ones that kids love? Well, certainly the vodka cruisers are big, and they were 1. They can be up to 1.7. And if you want the ones that most young people really want, particularly young women, they tend to be the double cruisers, which are up to 2 standard drinks. We then have these, which are just really dominating the market at the moment, and they are the seltzers. These are mineral waters mixed with a drink like vodka. And the most bizarre thing is, I can't believe anyone falls for this, but if you read just here, it says gluten-free. I mean, truly, how dumb do they think people are? But these are really pushed as the healthy alternative. They have how many carbs, they have how many calories, all that kind of stuff around. So they're trying to really appeal to that market. Then we have these, and these are just huge all across most parts of the Western world, the Smirnoff Double Blacks. Now, I've got to give the company due here because they were, some of these, up to 2.7 standard drinks, but they've dropped them down to 1.5, 1.9. Where's the next one? Oh, is it gone or is it gone? It's disappeared. I must have cut it. Oh, I don't know where it's gone. I must have lost it. Sorry, I've got that. But what I do next, which you are not going to see here in a minute, because I then don't know where the next slide has gone. I must have cut it out. But the next slide basically says, what does it mean then if you are saying 2 standard drinks? And essentially 2 standard drinks is about if you have two of these pre-mixed, you're basically saying at least 4 standard drinks. The reality is, in New Zealand, in my memory, most people don't take 2. It's a 4-pack that they get. So you're talking really up to 8 standard drinks. That is a bottle of wine or almost half a bottle of vodka that you are giving your child to take to a party. And if you look at New Zealand recommended levels of alcohol use for anyone under the age of 18, it's no alcohol at all. Now, and once again, as I'm saying, this is not about trying to shame parents at all, but it's really important to acknowledge how much they are actually consuming. When they go to a party, they're not just having a couple of drinks, they are drinking a significant amount of alcohol. Now, if you're okay with that, that's terrific, but it is a lot. This is the other study that I was going to talk about with parental provision, and this is an amazing study in New Zealand, in Australia. It had 10,000 children picked up in 2004, and they've been following them for since. Every year they do a different kind of topic. When they were at 16, 17, they looked at this. Alcohol use among teens allowed to drink at home. So what it looked at was if they did drink, how much, it showed this, a sample of 10,000, 28% of 16, 17-year-olds had permission to drink alcohol at home, 18% had permission to take alcohol to parties. What that meant was 82% of 16, 17-year-olds did not have permission to take alcohol to parties. So in Australia, and I can't imagine it would be any different here, the reality is most parents do not feel comfortable with their child drinking alcohol. They don't. There's this belief, though, that you're the only one, if you have that belief that you don't want your 16 or 17-year-old to drink, you're the only one who does it. Fact of the matter is, most people don't. You're in the majority if you don't. Teens allowed to drink at home are more likely to report having ever drunk alcohol. There's a real myth that parents have, and there is study after study after study that says parents believe that if you don't let them drink, if you don't give them alcohol, they'll go and drink somewhere by themselves and they'll drink more. The evidence says that's not true. In fact, saying no does delay their drinking. Does it stop everyone from drinking? Of course it doesn't. The fact of the matter is, if your child wants to drink alcohol, they're going to. But my message for parents is, if you don't feel comfortable with them drinking, make it as bloody difficult as possible. This whole idea of just bringing a silver platter in with the alcohol and saying go for it is most probably not going to protect them very much. So what can parents do? Well, you can do an awful lot and you can make a difference. The evidence is very clear you can. It's not easy, but you certainly can do it. First off, make your views about underage drinking clear. This, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that parents face, because if I threw out in this room now, what are your views about underage drinking? I guarantee that everyone would have a different view, but some of you would say, okay, well, I don't really want my child to drink till they're legally able to, so to the age of 18. What does that mean? Does that mean on the day they turn 18, as the clock strikes 12, they're allowed to drink? Does it mean they're allowed to drink in the year they turn 18? Where are they allowed to have their first drink? Who are they going to be with when they have their first? There are so many things to consider that parents don't think about. It's hard. And usually in a family, parents have very differing views in this area. And so trying to get parents on the same page here is very hard. Create rules and consequences around alcohol and parties. Ensure a united front, do your very best, because I'm pretty sure everyone in this room knows that your child will identify the weakest link really quickly. And usually in a room, and it's happening here as I'm saying it, because parents instantly look at each other and they go, you. You all know who the weakest link is, and your child knows who the weakest link is. They will identify them, they will separate you, and then they'll hammer the hell out of the weakest link, and they'll basically get what they want. So try to be as united as you can, promote positive norms. If you've got a family member or a friend like me who doesn't drink, wheel them out occasionally and go, oh, look at this strange person. Every year I've come here, one of the big things that I've been fascinated with, and the only reason I know this is in my notes, I write kind of extensive notes whenever I speak to kids, but every time I've come here, I've always had at least one young man come up to me and say, you're the first adult male I've ever known who doesn't drink. And I think that's kind of sad, because there's a lot of people who don't drink and we just don't talk about it very much. Consider your role modelling and maintain age-appropriate monitoring. And this is most probably one of the big ones. Now, I'll examine your parenting style, but let's do age-appropriate monitoring. I'm not going to go through this in any great detail, but this is, as I said, very importantly, it's not about helicopter parenting. Your child needs to stumble, they need to fall, they need to make mistakes. They need to go to events that potentially are a little bit risky, as long as you kind of put some safety nets around it. That's how they learn to be, well-rounded adults. But, and it's a really big but, rules and boundaries need to be kind of created to keep them as safe as possible, and they need to change as they get older. So what you actually create for a 14-year-old, you can't keep for very long. You've got to keep adapting it. I said after COVID, I think everything changed. Realistically, I used to say every 12 months, bring your child in, change. I really think every 6 months, you've got to sit down with your child and go, look, you've been great, you followed all the rules. Let's modify some of the rules and boundaries a bit. And the big one, of course, is curfew. But here's just some of the age-appropriate monitoring things that I suggest that parents should really look at. And the couple of ones here that I think are really important are, first off, know where they're going and who they're going to be with. Take them to where they're supposedly going and pick them up. And I can't emphasise that enough. If your child is going anywhere, if your child is 14 or above and they're going anywhere at 6 or 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, that is not where they're going. That is the pre-event, and there's something after. And that's the one you want to know something about. have the name and contact number of at least one of their friends that they'll be with when they go. I think this is something you create very, very early. I call it the buddy system. And you just say to them, you're not going anywhere without giving me a name and phone number of at least one person. And that you have to be a good, honest parent here and say, I promise I will never even look at what that number is unless I need to. But that number is a number that if you can't get hold of your child for some reason, you can contact someone else. You start that at 14 and you can keep it going all the way. If your child's living with you in their 20s, you can still use it, because you'll always want to know, have that contact. And this is the other big one. This is the one that parents refuse to do. It's absolutely fascinating. It doesn't matter what study you do, no parent wants to monitor their child's money. And the reality is, vapes cost money, alcohol costs money, illicit drugs cost money. And if your child has money and you can't see anything for it and it's disappearing, it's most probably going somewhere it shouldn't. Monitoring is incredibly important. My last couple of slides are these. So if they're invited to a party and you want to attend, what do I suggest you do? Well, don't be bullied into making a decision. Make sure, as I said, you have a united front. And what I've done is I've tested these. I believe there's only 4 things that parents need to know to allow them to make a decision to whether your child could go or not on a Saturday night. I've tested these with young people from the age of 14 all the way through to 18 in their final year of high school. And no one has really a problem with 3 of them, including the 18-year-olds. But everyone has a problem with 1 of them. They hate it. So if you can identify the one they hate. The 4 things to make an informed decisions are: whose sleepover party is it? And do you know them and their parents? Where will the party be held? Will parents be there? Will it be actively supervising? And what time does it start? What time does it finish? Which one do they hate? Well, they absolutely despise number 4. Why is that going up? It is bold. Will parents be there? Will be actively supervising? That's the one they hate. And if you ask them why, it's really simple. All the rest are one-word answers. This one involves a conversation. And the one thing your child doesn't want you to do is talk to anyone. They want to silo you. We wanted to silo our parents, so it's not like these kids are any different to us. But absolutely, this is a big one. And it's one of the most important ones, because I don't know if it's happening here, but certainly it's happening everywhere else I go. And I give talks in Europe, I've given talks in America as well. It's the same thing. Many of the events that young people go to, the parents simply aren't there. And if they are there, they're at one end of the house and the kids are at the other end of the house. They have no idea what's going on at the other end of the house. So this is really important. Actively supervising is important. My last couple of slides are these. I believe there's only one non-negotiable when it comes to parties. Only one. Everything else with your child is negotiable but this. Only you make the decision about how they get to where they're supposedly going and they return home. Only you. If your 16-year-old comes home and says, I'm going to Sally's house on Saturday night and I'm being picked up by Mrs. Jones and I'll see you on Tuesday, that's when you kind of go, hey, let's hold back. Let's pull back that a bit. When they start driving, I think it becomes a negotiable thing. You talk to each other. You consult about it. But realistically, if you speak to any law enforcement, frontline health worker, they will tell you this is where it goes wrong, when kids wander. And the one thing you don't want your kids to is to wander on a Saturday night. The safest option is you take them and you pick them up. But of course, some of you want social lives. So you know what you do? Here tonight, it's been quite interesting standing here watching you as you come in, because lots of you know each other and lots of you are talking to each other. Find one set of parents who have the same values as you and araldite them to your hip, because they are going to become incredibly useful for the rest of your high school experience. Because when your child looks at you and goes, you're the only one who does that, you go, no, here's Mrs. Jones. You only need one to shatter that argument. Only one. And it's really important. I think parents believe you need everyone else on site. You only need one to kind of absolutely just destroy that argument. If you're not going to pick them up, speak to a parent who is. And confirm. Please do not do texting to confirm details with parents. We had a horrible incident in Sydney recently where a parent contacted me. Most of you would know, in Sydney, one of the beach suburbs is Maroubra. There's a suburb which is so far out west called Penrith, which is way out in the middle of nowhere. And a 14-year-old girl, a mum called me, her 14-year-old daughter was, she got a phone call from Penrith Hospital. Her daughter was in intensive care in Penrith Hospital. Now, how a 14-year-old girl got from Maroubra to Penrith is just unbelievable, and its mum was beside herself. She said, I'd been texting the mother all the way through the week where my daughter was going. She wasn't texting the mother. She was texting the daughter's best friend. She had no knowledge of this, never met. And how did she get to Penrith? She'd given her daughter an Uber account. If you're going to give your child this easy accessibility to wherever, and the Uber account, do you have Uber here okay, well, the Uber account is exactly the same in New Zealand as it is in Australia. No one under the age of 18 can use an Uber. They're not allowed to. They have to have an 18-year-old in the car with them. If they don't, then, and Uber found out, you will lose your account and the driver will lose their accreditation. It's a simple part of the contract, which you sign. It's very clear. You can't do it. And what's happened is around the world, why Uber are starting to really strengthen this, is because of the number of sexual assaults that have occurred in Ubers. They tried to introduce, people see in America, it was in 2 states, junior Uber. And it kind of got quashed very quickly because of the potential problems with it. But this Uberization of parenting is a worry too. The last things I'll say is this. Tomorrow I will be showing the 11s, 12s and 13s this. This is one of the most important apps you can put onto your child's phone. In Australia we have something called Emergency Plus. You used to have it in Australia, in New Zealand, a version of it which was great. You don't have it anymore. Unfortunately it lost its funding, so it disappeared. This one is an international number, so it can be used anywhere around the world. The most important thing that kids need to know if they call for help, if they call 111, they need to know where they are. Most young people don't know where they are on a Saturday night. This will tell you. So what happens is when you push it, this screen comes up. Now, this is just the American one that's up there, but you just put it where you are, and so it would come up here, it would come up 111 for New Zealand. What happens is it gives you your street address, it gives you your GPS coordinates, your latitude and longitude. So when you actually ring, what will happen is you just say to the call handler, they say where your location, you can actually give your street address. The best part about this for parenting is that when you go home, if you sit with your child and you go, hey look, let's actually talk about calling for help. This is a great way of doing it. Loading it onto your phone and then just saying to your child, okay, if something goes wrong, you have my 100% support to actually call for help. Call 111, then call me. Really important, child. The number one reason we know in Australia, don't know if it's the same here, but I'd imagine it's exactly the same, why young people don't call for an ambulance is because they're frightened their parents will find out. That just simply shouldn't be the case. So if you have a conversation, you say, let's all put this onto our phone so we know where we are when something goes wrong. And then you have that wonderful conversation about keeping safer. And the final word is this, and I've been saying the same thing for a very long time. Number one, tell your children they're great all the time. It's been fascinating. I got into New Zealand last night and watching the news, you have exactly the same thing as we have at the moment, which is this unbelievable kind of wave of stories about youth crime. It is huge. It's kind of an issue around the world. Now, I am not saying that youth crime does not exist, because it certainly does, but it's a very small proportion of the population who are doing terrible things. We need to kind of make sure that our kids know that we think they're pretty good, and because they're living in this world where they're being bombarded by messages that all young people are terrible and doing awful things. I've been working with young people since 1978. And you know what, I think that the kids I meet today are really just quite phenomenal, doing incredible things. And we never speak about them. This kind of obsession with youth crime, which of course, as I said, is a terrible problem, needs to be kind of discussed in the same kind of mention as how many great young people we have at the same time. Really, really important. Listen to your child and connect. If I said to you, when's the last time that you and your child just were somewhere and you truly connected? No electronic devices. If you can think of the time it happened, the last time you're doing a great job. If you can't, you need to find a time. It is not about a quantity of time, it's about a quality. Many parents, I think one of the great problems we have with Uber is it's robbed parents of those wonderful opportunities in a car, because parents are now saying, oh, you want to go to Bill's house, just get an Uber there, instead of getting into a car. And I get why you do it, it's convenient and all that thing, but it robs you of those wonderful opportunities where you and your child sitting in a car, and you might just have that 30-second conversation that can make a huge difference in making sure you are connected. And then finally, there are 3 simple golden rules that we know through research, worldwide research, Number one, could possibly prevent illicit drug use and delay alcohol use for as long as possible. And that is number one, know where your child is. Number two, know who they're with. And number three, know when they'll be home. When they are young, when they are 12, 13, 14 years old, 12, 13, it's really easy. As they get older, this gets more and more difficult. And the really sad part is sometimes your child lies to you. And that's why you have to do your detective work to try to make sure you know what the truth is. I'm on social media. If anyone ever has a question, I am more than happy to answer it. I'm on Facebook and X, which kind of sounds a bit like a porn site. And I'm also on Instagram, where I now have about 48,000 followers on Instagram. I'm very proud of that. And on Saturday night, 8 o'clock, of course, you'd get it at 10 o'clock, I put up a post, a simple little post about keeping a bit safer, one of the strategies that I suggest in my talks. I also share some of the photos that young people send me, and I still find it gobsmacking that I get so many of these from New Zealand. I'm only here like twice a year, and it's not every year, which is remarkable. So many of the kids actually have been following me for years and years, which is unbelievable. And what parents do, which I think is really, really cool, is that parents now follow me on Instagram as well. And on a Saturday night when it comes up, they have this opportunity to go, oh, what did Paul talk about tonight? It's just a simple little thing that can have that little conversation on a Saturday night. I have a podcast, so if you want to listen to what I say to kids, you can hear that on my podcast. And I also have one for parents. And if anyone's looking at that photo of me and thinking that's been photoshopped, it hasn't, it's just very good lighting. It's a great pleasure to be back at the school. I look forward to speaking to your sons and daughters tomorrow. And once again, I'd like to thank a huge thank to Garth for his support, because he's been a great supporter of mine for many, many years. I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you so much.
So general questions or not? No.
If someone has a question, but I'm more than happy to, if anyone wants to. Yes.
We have not been around it with our Year 10 boys yet, but drug use. Teenagers drug testing, what they take, or are they just going full noise and just giving everything a crack? You know, do they test what they get?
Oh, you mean actually going to drug checking services? Yeah, I mean, New Zealand became the first country in the world to actually have a government authorised drug checking service. Places like Netherlands have other things, but New Zealand became the first country to do what they do. Are there young people accessing those services? Is that what you're asking? I doubt it very much. And certainly in this area, the current government, I don't think, is going to quite fund it as much as the previous government did. I don't think they're going to disband them because they've been quite successful. The reason they're very, very important in New Zealand is basically because, as I said, you're the end of the drug supply. So what happens is you're more likely to get poorer quality drugs than other places. And certainly that's what's popped up in the drug checking that has been around, in that there has been some warnings to say, bang, there's some really nasty stuff around at the moment. Are very young people accessing them? No, I don't think anywhere in the world does. I can remember when I went to the Netherlands and I was in the drug checking services there, and I said, how many young people access it? And they said this number. And I said, oh, that's quite surprising. That many, teenagers? And they said, oh no, that's people in their 20s. They never saw anyone very, very young. What's incredibly important for the really young people is to get the messages that come out of the drug checking to those young people, if you know what I mean, to actually say drugs are not good quality, that we have found this in this drug or this in this drug. And that's never been true of it at the moment. I don't know if people are aware, but nitrazines have just popped up, and they are literally, we believe we're going to see very similar things to what we've seen in America, in Australia and New Zealand, where the number of deaths is just skyrocketing. Because they're not just in opioids, which they were originally, but now in things like cocaine, MDMA, they're in a range of other things. So it's about getting the messages from drug checking to younger people and making them young people appropriate as well. I think that's the real key thing. If you just said to a group of Year 10s, there could be nitrazines in your cocaine, they're not really going to take, that's just going to go quite over their heads. So you've got to adapt it. But I think that whole message of that it's really important that we know what are in illegal drugs is a message that I think is important that young people should be aware of. Does that answer the question? Anyone else?
With relation to the first 20-odd slides about drugs and age groups, what constitutes as, like, how many times, like you said, 30% have done marijuana? Is it once, or is it more than 5 times, or?
That was past year use. I didn't do ever use, and New Zealand doesn't collect ever used anymore for exactly that reason, because an ever used might mean that they had one puff when they were 14 and haven't done it ever since. This was have you used in the past year, which is much meant to be not about regular use necessarily, but certainly more regular than ever, if that makes sense. So I think it's a much more true figure, because I think if you put ever, the numbers would be much, much higher, and they're kind of alarmist. So that's why they did past year. And you had a question?
Thanks. We've got a year, even son and year 13 boy, and just wondering if you can give us a brief overview of what you were talking to them about tomorrow, whether these differences between the two.
Yeah, well, the year 13s have seen me. They saw me back in year 11 the year before last. So they had my year 11s get my kind of introduction, which is realistically looking about, first off, I talk about the myths around, I start by saying, if you had a drunk friend, what do you do to look after them? And typically young people say 3 things that don't work and 2 of them which kill. And the 3 things they say is, number 1, they feed them bread, which is quite possibly the dumbest thing you could ever do in your life, because we've had quite a few deaths as a result of that. Second one is cold showers, which doesn't work. And then the third one is giving them lots of water, which potentially can kill you as well. We've had a few deaths from that. And you say that to a group of year 11s and they almost have a nervous breakdown, because of course they've done all those 3 things. And then you talk about how do you look after someone, and then I do some norms about the fact that most people don't do don't use drugs and all that kind of stuff. And then what do I look at then? Then I'll talk about vaping, and I'll talk about what vaping is and etc. And then some more alcohol safety stuff. So it's much more about alcohol in year 11. And year 13 goes into, I'll talk about vaping as well to some extent, but then it's a lot about kind of driving, about how long should you wait before you drive again, around alcohol, all the things that can cause you to fail a breathalyzer, even if you haven't been drinking alcohol. That always shocks them. And I will most probably do a little bit of stuff around ecstasy, only because of what popped up in that survey about Canterbury, because it certainly does look like that's a drug that they're going to most probably see. So MDMA I'll talk a bit about. Does that help? I think it's really important, if you have a year 11, a year 12 or a year 13 child tomorrow, to when they get home really just say to them, oh, what did you think? Hopefully they'll come home, and what usually happens, they say something. So if they do, just listen, because that's the whole point of doing this. I do not believe that coming in and speaking to a group of young people for an hour and a half is going to make massive changes in their life. But what I've done, and Garth has been always incredibly supportive of this, is I basically come in and I stir the pot. I speak to the young people, I speak to staff if I can, and I speak to parents. And the whole idea is getting you all talking about this issue, because that's how we make change, and that's how we kind of make sure our kids are as protected as possible. Are we going to, we're never going to stop young people from drinking if that's what they want to do. They're going to use illicit drugs, they're going to want. But the whole idea of it is about keeping them safer, making sure that if they do make foolish decisions, they know what to do if something goes wrong.
Can I just ask again, what would be your advice for parents? And unfortunately, there's a group of boys, I'm not going to name names.
Good.
They're on school camp at the moment, so they're not going to be here they're too young to hear you talk, unfortunately. But there's a little group of kids got their foot on the gas. How do you get them to, we can talk all we like to them, but what would be some advice for me? Once they already think, the horse is kind of trying to bolt and we're just hanging on tight.
Well, I would say if you can, hold on for as long as you possibly can, and just try to keep your, if you've let a few things go, you can't pull them back. Do you know what I mean? So you can't backtrack. You try that, you'll just have a disaster. But I think certainly making sure you draw your line, understand where you are now and go, well, this is as far as I'm going, and making sure they understand what their boundaries are. But then putting things into place, like, you know, making sure you have a conversation. I know it sounds really, really silly, but that app is a great conversation starter just to say to them, if anything, God forbid, ever goes wrong, you do that, then you call me. That whole message of making sure that they know, because the worst part about particularly risk-taking 14-year-olds, which I'm saying that's the age you're talking about, that age group is where things go terribly wrong because they have no life experience. They are being treated as young adults, but they don't have the brain development to match it. So when things go wrong, they have no idea what to do. They flick back to simple things like, oh, someone's drunk, let's force feed them bread, or we'll give them lots of water, or we'll do something dumb. It's about kind of saying to them, okay, well, you're involved in this activity, let's try to make it as safe as possible. If something goes wrong, you know what to do. Number one, they will call you. Number two, give them some skills and strategies yourself. Look, I always say to parents, the best conversation you can have with your child around alcohol is around vomit. They love talking about vomit. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at the number one problem that most young people will experience when they drink, it's vomiting. And if you ask any young person, how do you look after someone who's vomiting? No one knows. Why? Because no one's ever told them. Simple little thing about making sure that they know how to look after someone who's vomiting. You'll have a great conversation and you're giving them a skill. And those are the kind of things I think you can do practically. Can you put anything to stop them doing anything? If, as you said, the horse is bolted? Most probably not. But you can certainly put things into place to keep them safer. Does that make any sense? And there's lots of stuff on my website that you can access. And of course, if something ever, please take my email address. If something ever goes wrong and you need some help with some specific thing, don't hesitate to call. I spend most Saturday mornings on the phone for about 3 hours to parents, some of whom, and can I tell you, if anybody in this room thinks that you've had terrible experiences with your child, think of the worst thing, multiply it by 700 and you come close to some of the parents I speak to. But I literally speak to parents whose 12-year-old son go out on a Friday night and don't come home till Tuesday. And I'm not joking. And I have known so many parents who've lost their children. They've tragically died. And no one wants that to happen. And so it's about making sure you keep connected. If your child is already bolted, it's a beautiful way to put it, if that's already happened, then you just want to keep that connection. That's the most important thing. Because the minute you lose that connection, then that's because it's very hard to get that back. So, trying to put boundaries around once they've bolted, you're going to lose them. They're going to pull away from you. You don't want that to happen. Now, don't become the cool mum, because if you become the cool mum, it's a disaster. But you don't want to go down that line. But you still want to have the boundaries around, but you just kind of got to be a little bit more, I suppose, the boundaries have to shift a little bit further out. But maintain them. Don't let them go any further.
I always had this one little thing with my kids was going out at night. There's boundaries about how you set them and somehow can keep them, and then you're able to negotiate. I always remember the story about, in Australia it's years 9 to 12, so if you're in year 10 you go out till 10 o'clock, I'm picking you up at 10 o'clock. In year 11 I'm picking you up at 11 o'clock. In year 12 I'm going to pick you up at 12 o'clock. And I remember the first week of my son being in year 12, equivalent to year 13, maybe you can let the hours go out an hour, and I was stuffed after the first 2 weeks of school or something. He was going to a party on Saturday night, and he basically said, and I said, can I pick you up at 11 or something? I'm so stuffed. And he said, no, it's 12 o'clock. I'm like, 12. But the battle with that is, in year 11 and year 10, he came home at 11 o'clock and he came home at 10 o'clock, and one of us, mum or dad, picked him up. And that whole idea of sort of setting those things so then you can negotiate when you can start to trust them. That's an important thing, because there is the risk that they potentially love, and your expressions of love can come through the rules that you set, because you're actually taking enormous amounts of pressure off them, because their peer group so pressurising you. They want your love. They want you to be there. They might not look and feel like that, but they do want you to. They'll be thankful you go and pick them up. They'll be thankful you're there. They want to escape sometimes, and you're their escape route, and you can be blamed. So that's an interesting sort of thing around what they have to do. And I guess the challenge that I think, Paul, the social media piece and the fact that media is now such a fourth parent in the room means that the proactivity of parenting has to be different to that you experienced as a child, and as you were growing up, you need to be more actively involved in maintaining the relationships and probably more intentional about that than I had to be as a parent, just generationally. We all have to be quite intentional in the manner in which we engage and know where young people are at and what they're doing, because they have a whole lot more to deal with now than we did.
Yeah, so much more.
You know, you'll come to the porn talk in 3 weeks' time, and then you'll come to the next talk in 3 weeks' time about the challenges of what they deal with. They're confused. They just need you to be alongside them.
I think parents are very confused as well, because when you look at parenting styles, which I had cut out of this talk, there are 4, and it's basically done on strictness and love. And essentially you've got authoritarian parenting, which is lots and lots of rules and not much love, and then authoritative, which is lots of rules but lots and lots of love. And I think parents are very confused because they think, if they go back to their teen years, they think, I lived under authoritarian. There was lots of rules, and you know what, I rebelled against them, blah, 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 blah. I don't want to be that parent. And so where they don't move to is they don't move to authoritative. They move down to what I always call the eastern suburbs of Sydney parenting, which is basically permissive parenting. This whole idea of, well, I'll be my child's best friend. And there's a middle one, and I think parents just don't quite get there, is that middle one, where you have lots and lots of love. You do trust your child to do certain things, but at the same time there's some rules there. And that's where everything has kind of shifted, because I think our current generation, particularly, as I said, if you did drink out, the generation of parents, if you did drink when you were young, you drank behind a bush with a box of wine. And you did that because your parents were really strict, and if IGU got caught, blah, blah, you don't want to be that parent. So you move to permissive instead of authoritative. And you can have lots of love and you can still have rules, that's okay. But I can't stress enough, if your child is kind of acting out in year 9, they're already at year 10, as a 14-year-old, and they're really pushing boundaries. If you've let a couple of those boundaries go now, don't let any more go. Put your boundaries around now and try to maintain it, because if you do that, it will keep them safer. If you keep letting go when they're that young, they simply don't have the life experience to back up if something goes wrong. And inevitably, something will. Hopefully it won't be too bad, but in almost every single case that I've ever been involved with, any parent I've ever met, something does go wrong at some point. I'm going to let you go.
Thanks, everyone.
It's late.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.